The music room at the back of the school was always empty after classes ended. Dust gathered on the old piano. Its keys faded and chipped, like no one had touched them for years. The sound of the hallway chatter would fade as the last students left and silence filled the air. That silence was what drew her there. It wasn't about attention or showing off. It was about finding a place where she could just be herself. She wasn't one of those popular students who always had people around them. She was quiet, observant, and often sat in the back of the classroom. Most people barely noticed her, and those who did usually didn't have kind things to say. She never gave them a reason to talk, but that never stopped them from whispering anyway. It all started one afternoon when the teacher was late, and everyone was hanging around the hallway. She passed by the music room and heard a small group of students laughing. They had been fooling around with the piano, pressing random keys, trying to play some pop song they didn't really know. When they noticed her standing there, one of them joked, "Hey, you want to play too? Maybe you can make it sound worse." She smiled awkwardly and shook her head, but something inside her made her step closer. She wasn't sure why. The piano looked old but somehow beautiful. She walked up to it, ignoring the laughter behind her, and slowly pressed a key. The sound was slightly off tune, but it echoed gently through the room. She pressed another, then another, and for a few seconds everything felt still, like the world outside had gone silent. But that moment didn't last long. Someone snorted and said loudly, "She doesn't even know what she's doing." Another one laughed. "Yeah, maybe she thinks she's some kind of music genius." Their laughter broke through the calm she had felt, and she quickly pulled her hands away, embarrassed. She turned and left the room, pretending it didn't bother her. But deep down it did. Their laughter stayed in her head the whole day. That night she couldn't stop thinking about that piano. Even though the sound was imperfect, it had touched something in her heart. It was strange. She had never taken music lessons, never had a teacher, never thought about playing before. But the sound of those keys had left a mark on her. It was like the piano had spoken to her in a language she somehow understood. The next day, after school ended, she waited for everyone to leave before sneaking back into the music room. The door creaked open softly and she stood there for a moment listening. The room was empty. She walked to the piano, sat down, and placed her hands on the keys again. Her fingers trembled, but she pressed a few notes, slowly, softly. The sound filled the empty room, bouncing off the walls. She smiled. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. She stayed there for nearly an hour, just pressing random keys and listening to the sounds they made. Every mistake made her laugh quietly to herself. It felt peaceful. For once, she wasn't thinking about school, about the people who made fun of her, or about how small she felt in a world full of loud voices. In that little room, it was just her and the music. But her secret practice didn't stay secret for long. One afternoon, as she was playing, she didn't hear the door open. A group of students walked in, talking loudly. When they saw her sitting there, their voices stopped. She froze, her hands still on the piano. Then the teasing began. "Oh, look, it's the piano prodigy again," one of them said sarcastically. "Play us a song, genius," another added, laughing. Her face turned red. She wanted to disappear. They laughed as she stood up quickly and tried to walk out. But one of them blocked her way and said, "Come on, don't stop now. Show us what you got." She didn't say a word. She just looked down and quietly left the room. The laughter followed her all the way down the hall. That night, she didn't go back to the music room. She stayed home, trying to convince herself that it didn't matter. But it did. Every time she closed her eyes, she could still hear the sound of their laughter. It wasn't just teasing. It was the sound of people who didn't believe she could ever be good at something. But the piano kept calling her back. A few days later, she found herself standing in front of that same door again. She looked around carefully to make sure no one was watching. Then she slipped inside. This time she came prepared. She had borrowed a small notebook from the library about basic piano lessons. She placed it next to her and started following the drawings and letters on the page. At first her hands felt stiff and the notes didn't sound right. But she kept trying. Again and again. Every wrong note made her frown, but every small improvement made her smile. Weeks passed like that. She would finish her homework, wait until everyone left, and then sneak into the music room. Sometimes she stayed until the janitor came to lock the building. Her fingers grew sore, her back ached, but she didn't stop. Slowly, She began to understand the rhythm of music, how pressing one key could change the entire mood of a melody. It became her escape. Her family didn't know much about her secret. They were busy with their own struggles, and she didn't want to trouble them. When they noticed her coming home late, she just said she was working on a school project. In truth, she was building something much more important, her confidence. One rainy evening, she stayed longer than usual. The rain hit the windows gently, creating a soft background sound that blended with the notes she played. She wasn't following the notebook anymore. She was just playing what she felt. Sadness, hope, loneliness, everything that words couldn't express. When she finished, she sat quietly for a few minutes, staring at the piano. Her reflection in the shiny black surface looked different somehow. She felt alive, but the world outside didn't change overnight. The next day at school, she heard someone whisper, "I saw her in the music room again. She thinks she's some kind of star." Another voice said, "It's cute she's trying, but come on, she's never going to be good." She didn't respond. She had learned to let their words bounce off her, even though sometimes they still hurt. Then one afternoon, something unexpected happened. As she was practicing, the music teacher, who rarely came around, walked in. She froze, her hands stuck mid-air. The teacher listened quietly for a moment before speaking. "You've been practicing, haven't you?" The girl nodded nervously. "You have potential," the teacher said gently. "If you keep going, you might surprise yourself." Those words hit her harder than any insult ever had, but in a good way. Someone finally saw something in her. That single sentence became her new source of strength. She practiced harder than ever, spending hours perfecting small parts of songs. The keys became her second language, one she spoke fluently with emotion. Sometimes she still faced ridicule. Some classmates would walk by the music room and make exaggerated piano gestures, laughing loudly, but she didn't stop. The sound of her music slowly began to drown out their laughter. She had learned something powerful, that people's opinions only matter if you let them. Her journey had just begun, but something inside her had already changed. She no longer played to prove anything to anyone. She played because it made her feel free. The music room, once a place of embarrassment, had now become her sanctuary, a small world of her own where her heart spoke louder than any word ever could. Outside, people still whispered. But inside that quiet room, her fingers danced across the keys, shaping a melody that would one day make them listen, not with laughter, but with admiration. The sound of her piano playing had become a secret rhythm in her life. Every note she learned added a bit of confidence to her quiet world. But while the piano gave her peace, the outside world was still the same, full of people who didn't understand why she spent her time on something that, to them, didn't matter. Her morning started early, like everyone else's, but her thoughts were always somewhere else. During class, when others chatted or passed notes, she often stared out the window, hearing melodies in her head that didn't exist yet. When the final bell rang, she didn't rush to the school gate like the others. She waited, pretending to organize her bag until most students had gone. Then she made her way back to the music room. That small room had become her safe place, her world. The walls were cracked, the piano still carried marks of age, and the faint smell of dust lingered, but to her it was perfect. She wiped the piano keys every day before sitting down. The sound that came from it wasn't smooth or fancy, but it was honest. She started writing down short melodies in her notebook, simple ones that came to her mind while practicing. Sometimes when she hit the right notes, she smiled quietly, her heart swelling with pride. Other times, frustration made her sigh loudly, but she always came back. No matter how bad the day was, she always found peace there. Still, the teasing hadn't stopped. Whenever she walked down the hallway, she could hear whispers. "There goes the piano girl," someone would say mockingly. Another would add, "Maybe she'll perform at our next lunch break." The laughter that followed always made her shoulders tighten. She tried to ignore them, but it wasn't easy. The world around her didn't celebrate quiet passion. It noticed noise, drama, and popularity. Her dream didn't fit into any of those boxes. But she held on to a quiet promise she had made to herself, to keep learning no matter what anyone said. Weeks turned into months. Her skills improved. Her fingers moved faster and smoother. She began recognizing chords and rhythm. The piano wasn't just an instrument anymore. It had become a part of her. She played with feeling, with patience, and with stories hidden in her heart. One evening, as she was practicing, The same teacher who had once encouraged her stopped by again. He stood silently by the door, listening. When she finished, he clapped softly. "You're progressing well," he said with a smile. "Have you ever thought about playing at the school showcase?" Her eyes widened. "Me?" she asked, almost whispering. "Yes," he replied. "You have real emotion in your playing. The showcase is coming next month. You should think about it." The idea both thrilled and terrified her. Performing in front of everyone, the same people who mocked her, sounded impossible. But the thought wouldn't leave her. That night she couldn't sleep. Her heart kept replaying those words. You should think about it. The next day she sat quietly at lunch while others laughed and talked. The piano was all she could think about. By evening she made her decision. She was going to do it. She was going to play. Not for them, not for attention, but for herself. When she signed her name on the list of participants for the school showcase, she felt her hand shaking. A few students nearby saw her name and exchanged looks. One of them laughed and said, "She's actually doing it? This is going to be funny." Another added, "Can't wait to see her mess up in front of everyone." She heard every word, but she didn't look up. She just walked away, holding her notebook close to her chest. That night she practiced longer than ever. She wanted to choose the perfect song, something simple but meaningful. After days of searching, she decided to compose her own small piece. It wasn't something grand. It was something real, something that told her story. Every night after finishing her homework, she sat at the piano and played. Sometimes she stumbled. Sometimes her hands ached, but she didn't stop. The janitor who cleaned the hallways often passed by and smiled, nodding quietly as if cheering her on. Even though she didn't know his name, his small gestures meant the world to her. The days leading up to the showcase were full of nerves. She kept her participation a secret from her family. She didn't want anyone to expect too much or worry for her. She just wanted to play, but at school whispers spread quickly. Some students made jokes about her upcoming performance, calling it the most boring act of the night. Her friends, though few, encouraged her. One of them said softly, "Don't listen to them. They laugh because they can't do what you do." Those words stayed in her heart like a shield. The night before the showcase, she sat alone in her room, staring at her reflection in the mirror. She whispered to herself, "You can do this. Just close your eyes and play." Then she smiled faintly and went to bed, her fingers twitching softly as if still touching the keys. The next morning, the school was buzzing with excitement. Posters and lights decorated the hall. Students rushed around practicing their acts. Laughter and chatter filled the air. She sat quietly in a corner, waiting for her turn, her heart beating faster with each passing minute. When her name was called, a wave of fear rushed through her. Her legs felt heavy, her throat dry. She took a deep breath and walked onto the stage. The lights were bright, almost blinding. The piano stood there in the center, waiting for her. She sat down, adjusted the stool, and took another deep breath. The audience was restless. Some whispered, some giggled. She heard one voice say, "Oh, it's her." Another laughed softly. Her hands trembled as she placed them on the keys. For a second she wanted to run away, but then she remembered all those nights. The empty room, the rain tapping on the window, the old piano waiting just for her. She closed her eyes and began to play. The first few notes were soft and uncertain, but then her fingers found their rhythm. The sound filled the hall, gentle at first, then growing stronger. Every note carried a piece of her, the loneliness, the pain, the quiet hope. The laughter in the crowd slowly faded. People stopped whispering. The only sound left was the melody that flowed from her heart. Time disappeared. She wasn't in front of her classmates anymore. She was back in that old music room alone, playing for herself. Her hands moved gracefully, her eyes half closed, lost in the music. When she reached the last note, she held it for a second longer, letting it echo softly in the hall. Then silence. She looked up, nervous, waiting for someone to laugh or clap half-heartedly. But instead there was a pause, and then a wave of applause that grew louder and louder. Students stood up cheering. The same people who once made fun of her were now clapping, some even smiling in awe. Her heart swelled. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. The teacher who had encouraged her smiled proudly from the corner. The principal nodded in approval. Even the ones who once mocked her had admiration in their eyes. She stood up slowly, bowed, and walked off the stage with tears quietly slipping down her cheeks. Not from sadness, but from relief. She had done it. She had faced her fear, faced the laughter, and turned it into applause. That night, as she sat alone in the music room once more, she touched the piano keys and whispered, "We did it." The room was quiet, but it felt full of everything she had dreamed of. She realized something that night. Sometimes, the world won't believe in you until you show them why they should. And sometimes it's not about proving them wrong. It's about proving to yourself that you were always right to keep going. The girl who once hid from laughter had now become the reason people smiled. And though this was just the beginning of her journey, she knew one thing for sure. She would never stop playing again. After the school showcase, her life began to change in quiet, unexpected ways. The sound of applause from that night still echoed in her mind. It was something she had never imagined for herself. People standing, clapping, smiling. For once, their eyes weren't filled with judgment or laughter. They were filled with admiration. The next morning, when she walked through the school gates, the atmosphere felt different. People actually noticed her. A few students smiled, some whispered, but not in a mocking way. One of her classmates even said softly, "Hey, that was amazing last night." It caught her off guard. She didn't know how to respond, so she just nodded and smiled shyly before walking away. It felt strange, but good. For the first time, she felt seen. The teacher who had supported her called her into the music room later that day. "You played beautifully," he said, his voice warm. "You have something rare. You play with emotion, not just skill. You should keep going." She thanked him quietly, her heart still fluttering with disbelief. She had never been praised like that before. It gave her a sense of strength she didn't know she had. But even with the sudden attention, she didn't let it get to her head. She kept her same routine, finishing her homework, sneaking into the music room after class, and playing until her fingers were tired. The applause had given her courage, but it also made her want to improve more. She didn't want that performance to be the end of her story. As weeks passed, the curiosity around her grew. Students who had once laughed at her began asking questions. "How long have you been playing? Did someone teach you? Can you show me how to play that song?" She was surprised by their interest, but also nervous. She wasn't used to being the center of attention. Some of them genuinely admired her, but she could still sense a few who were only curious for the sake of gossip. Still, she remained kind. She believed that people could change. Maybe her music had softened their hearts, even if just a little. Soon, the principal announced that the school would be hosting a local music competition, open to students from nearby schools. The event would take place in 3 months, and the winner would earn a scholarship for professional piano lessons. The moment she heard about it, something sparked inside her. That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the chance to learn from real teachers, to play on a stage bigger than the one at school. But the thought of competing also scared her. What if she wasn't good enough? What if she froze in front of everyone? The next day, she talked to her teacher about it. "Do you think I should try?" she asked softly. He smiled gently. "If you want to grow, you should. Winning isn't the goal, learning is. But I believe you can do both." His words gave her the final push she needed. She signed up for the competition. From that day on, her practice became more intense. She stayed late every evening, repeating the same pieces again and again until every note sounded just right. She read about famous pianists, watched old performances online, and listened carefully to how professionals played with both skill and soul. Her fingers sometimes ached, but she didn't stop. Each night she whispered to herself, "One day I'll make them proud." At home, her family began to notice her dedication. Her mother once peeked into her room late at night and saw her drawing little piano notes in her notebook. "You've really fallen in love with that piano, haven't you?" she said softly. She smiled and replied, "It makes me feel alive." Her family didn't fully understand her dream, but they supported her quietly. They began to see that this wasn't just a phase, it was her purpose. The weeks before the competition were full of ups and downs. There were moments when she felt confident, and moments when she doubted everything. One afternoon while practicing, she played the wrong notes repeatedly and burst into tears out of frustration. She slammed the keys softly and whispered, "Why can't I get this right?" The janitor, who had often heard her play, walked by and said kindly, "Every mistake brings you closer to perfection. Don't give up." His simple words made her smile through her tears. She wiped her face and began again. As the day of the competition drew near, the school started buzzing with excitement. Posters went up, listing participants from different schools. She was one of the youngest on the list. Some people doubted her chances, saying the competition would be tough, but she didn't let that shake her. On the morning of the event, she woke up before dawn. Her hands trembled as she packed her small bag with sheet music and a lucky charm her mother had given her. As she got dressed, she looked at herself in the mirror and whispered, "You've come this far. Just play with your heart." The auditorium where the competition was held was much bigger than her school hall. The stage looked enormous and the grand piano gleamed under the lights. The sound of murmuring voices filled the air, nervous competitors, proud parents, and serious judges taking notes. When she saw the other participants, her confidence wavered. They looked so experienced, dressed elegantly, some even talking about the music schools they attended. She stood quietly in a corner, feeling small again. But when her teacher arrived and gave her an encouraging nod, she felt a bit stronger. "Just remember why you started," he said before leaving her to prepare. One by one, the other contestants performed. Their music was flawless, but something about it felt mechanical. They played with skill, but not with feeling. She reminded herself that her strength was different. Her music came from emotion, not perfection. Finally, her name was called. She took a deep breath and walked up to the piano. Her steps felt heavy, but she kept her eyes forward. The hall went quiet as she sat down and placed her hands on the keys. At first, her fingers shook. The first few notes were gentle, hesitant. But then she closed her eyes and remembered all the nights in the empty music room, all the laughter she had faced, all the tears she had shed. The emotions poured through her fingertips. The melody she played told her story. The pain, the struggle, the small victories, the hope. The hall fell silent, completely captured by the sound. Even the judges leaned forward, listening closely. When she finished, she didn't open her eyes right away. She just let the final note fade into the air. Then she slowly looked up. The audience was quiet for a second, and then applause erupted, louder than she had ever heard before. Tears filled her eyes. She stood up, bowed politely, and left the stage. Her heart was racing, but this time not from fear. It was from joy. She didn't know if she had won, but it didn't matter. She had played the way she wanted, with honesty. When the results were announced later that evening, she sat in the back row, her hands tightly clasped. Her name was called as one of the top 3 finalists. She couldn't believe it. Her teacher clapped proudly, his eyes shining. She didn't win first place, but she didn't need to. What she gained was far greater: respect, recognition, and belief in herself. People approached her after the event, asking about her journey, congratulating her. Some even said her performance was their favorite because it felt real. As she walked home that night, the stars above seemed brighter than usual. She thought about the first time she had touched the piano, the laughter, the embarrassment, the lonely nights, and then she smiled. Every painful moment had led her here. When she reached home, she sat by the window and whispered to herself, "This is just the beginning." And she was right. What started as a moment of ridicule had now turned into a story of hope and quiet strength. A story that was still being written, one note at a time. After the music competition, her life began to shift in ways she never expected. She hadn't won first place, but her performance had touched people. It wasn't about the trophy anymore. It was about the way her music made others feel. That mattered more than anything else. When she returned to school, her classmates looked at her differently. Some came up to her and said, "We watched the video of your performance online. It was beautiful." Others smiled politely when she walked by. The same people who once mocked her now spoke to her with respect. But even though the world around her was changing, she remained humble. She didn't brag, didn't show off, didn't let praise change who she was. She still spent her afternoons in the same old music room, practicing on the same worn-out piano. For her, it wasn't about fame or attention. It was about love. Music had become her way of breathing. The teacher who had guided her occasionally stopped by to listen. He could see the difference in her playing. The maturity, the control, the feeling. "You've come a long way," he told her one day. "But remember, talent is just the start. Discipline is what makes it last." She nodded, understanding every word. Outside of school, opportunities slowly began to appear. A local community center invited her to perform during a small charity event. When she stepped onto the stage, she felt the same nerves as before, the same trembling hands and racing heart. But when she started playing, all of that disappeared. Her music flowed softly, calm, and comforting. The audience, made up of strangers from all walks of life, sat quietly listening. Some closed their eyes. Others smiled gently. When she finished, the applause was warm and heartfelt. People came to her afterward, thanking her for bringing peace through her music. That night, as she walked home, the cool air brushed against her face. She couldn't stop smiling. For the first time, she realized something powerful. Her gift wasn't just hers. It belonged to everyone who needed to feel something, even for a moment. She continued performing at small events, each one giving her more experience. Her teacher encouraged her to start composing her own music, saying, "You have a story to tell. Let your heart write it." She began writing songs inspired by her journey, the loneliness, the laughter, the fear, the hope. Her notebook slowly filled with handwritten notes and lyrics. Each page carried a piece of her soul. But life wasn't all smooth. With recognition came new challenges. Some students, once friendly, started growing distant again. A few whispered behind her back, saying she was acting like a star now. Others claimed she was getting special treatment from teachers. At first, those words hurt. She didn't understand why people always tried to pull others down just when they started to rise. But with time, she learned to stay calm. She didn't answer with anger. She answered with music. She poured all her emotions into her piano. Every insult turned into a note, every lonely moment into a melody. And somehow her pain became something beautiful. Months passed and she grew stronger. Her name began to spread beyond school. Not because she was famous, but because people talked about the girl who played from the heart. Some even called her the girl who turned silence into music. One afternoon, while she was practicing, a man from a nearby arts academy came to see her. He had heard about her through her teacher and wanted to watch her play. She didn't know who he was at first, but when she finished, he smiled and said, "You have something special. Our academy offers scholarships for young musicians. I think you should apply." Her heart skipped a beat. She could hardly believe what she was hearing. The thought of learning from professionals, having access to real instruments, and meeting others who shared her passion, it felt like a dream. That evening, she told her family about the opportunity. They were surprised but proud. Her mother hugged her tightly, saying, "You've worked so hard. You deserve this chance." She applied for the scholarship and waited nervously for weeks. During that time, she practiced more than ever, preparing herself in case she got called for an audition. The day finally came when she received a letter. Her hands shook as she opened it. The words inside made her eyes fill with tears. She had been accepted. It felt unreal. Her teacher congratulated her, saying, "This is just the next step. Remember where you started and never lose that humility." As she began attending the academy, her world expanded. The pianos there were shiny and well-tuned, the classrooms filled with talented students. At first, she felt out of place. Everyone around her seemed more skilled, more confident, more experienced. But then she reminded herself, she had learned everything from scratch, with no help, no lessons, just determination. That made her unique. She worked quietly, focusing on learning. Some students noticed her natural ability and admired her. Others were competitive. But she didn't let that bother her. She knew why she was there. Her instructors were impressed by her sensitivity to sound and emotion. One of them told her, "Technique can be taught, but emotion cannot. You have both." Those words made her realize how far she'd come from that first day when she timidly touched the piano while others laughed. During her second semester at the academy, the school organized a large concert. Each student had to perform a piece they had created themselves. It was the biggest event of the year, with an audience full of teachers, families, and even music critics. When she heard about it, she felt the same nervous excitement she had felt before her very first showcase. This time, though, she wasn't afraid. She saw it as another opportunity to share her story. She spent weeks composing a new piece, one that captured her journey. It began with slow, uncertain notes like the sound of someone learning to walk. Then the melody grew stronger, representing courage, and finally ended in a warm, powerful tone that spoke of hope and self-belief. The night of the concert arrived. Backstage, she closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She could hear the crowd outside, The soft hum of conversation, the sound of footsteps echoing in the hall. When her turn came, she walked onto the stage calmly. The lights were bright, but she wasn't afraid of them anymore. She sat down, adjusted her stool, and looked at the piano. Her old friend, the one thing that had never failed her. When she started playing, the hall fell silent. Each note flowed like a story being told without words. People could feel her emotions, the pain, the resilience, the triumph. By the time she reached the final chord, many in the audience were holding back tears. As the last note faded, there was a pause, then thunderous applause. People stood, clapping, cheering, moved by her music. For her, it wasn't about recognition. It was about connection. She realized her music had touched hearts, the same way music had once healed hers. After the performance, one of her teachers said softly, "You reminded everyone tonight why music exists, to speak when words cannot." She smiled, tears shining in her eyes. That night, as she walked home under the quiet stars, she remembered every moment, the laughter, the loneliness, the practice, the small victories. Everything had led her here. She had turned pain into art, doubt into determination, and mockery into music that people couldn't forget. And though she still had a long way to go, she knew one thing for sure. She would keep playing, not for applause, not for awards, but because it was who she was. The girl who was once laughed at for sitting at the piano was now the reason people believed in the power of dreams. And her story, like her music, was still playing, softly, beautifully, endlessly. The weeks after the concert felt like a dream. Everywhere she went, people from the academy greeted her with smiles and kind words. Some even asked if she could teach them how to play with that much feeling. For the first time in her life, she felt fully seen. Not as the quiet girl who once sat alone at an old piano, but as someone who had something valuable to offer. But she didn't let the praise get to her head. Instead of celebrating with noise, she celebrated in silence, by sitting once again in front of the piano, fingers gently resting on the keys, heart calm and grateful. For her, that simple moment of peace meant more than any applause ever could. The music room in the academy became her second home. After classes, she often stayed late, playing until the janitor politely reminded her it was time to leave. Her friends teased her about never taking a break, but she laughed it off. "I'm not working," she'd say softly. "I'm just talking to the piano." Every time she played, she discovered something new, a feeling she hadn't expressed yet, a thought she hadn't noticed before. Music was no longer just sound. It was emotion, memory, and healing all at once. Months later, she received another letter, this time from a local cultural organization. They had heard about her academy performance and wanted her to perform at a regional youth music festival. It was a huge opportunity. The event would be televised and audiences from across the region would be watching. When she told her family, their eyes filled with pride. Her mother hugged her tightly, whispering, "You've come so far, my dear. No matter what happens, we're proud of you." Her teacher at the academy also supported her fully. He helped her prepare for the performance, guiding her through advanced techniques and stage presence. This time, he said, "Don't just play for yourself. Play for everyone who ever doubted themselves. Let them hear what courage sounds like." Those words stayed with her. In the following weeks, she worked harder than ever. There were days when her fingers ached, but she didn't stop. She practiced through rain and shine, sometimes skipping meals without realizing it. Every note mattered. Every chord carried meaning. One evening, while practicing alone, she paused midway through a melody. She looked at the piano, the same kind of instrument that once made people laugh at her. She remembered that first day in the school auditorium, when she sat down to play and everyone whispered and giggled. That memory still hurt a little, but it no longer defined her. It had simply become part of her story. She smiled faintly, whispering to herself, "Thank you for making me strong." The night of the festival finally arrived. The venue was enormous, with bright lights, cameras, and a crowd that filled every seat. Backstage, she could feel her heartbeat quicken. She could hear the muffled sound of applause as other performers finished their acts. When her name was announced, the lights dimmed. She walked slowly onto the stage, dressed in a simple white gown, her hair neatly tied back. The grand piano stood in the center, shining under the spotlight. For a brief second, she looked around. At the audience, the judges, the cameras. Then she took a deep breath and sat down. Silence filled the hall. Her fingers touched the keys and the first note rang out. Soft, almost like a whisper. The melody began gently, telling a story without words. Each chord carried a piece of her journey. The loneliness of being mocked. The quiet determination, the endless practice. The first moment of applause, the unshakable belief that music could heal. As she played, her hands moved freely, almost like they were dancing. The music grew louder, more powerful, full of emotion. People could feel it, not just hear it. Some in the audience closed their eyes. Others leaned forward, completely lost in the sound. Even the judges looked moved. It wasn't a performance anymore. It was a confession, a prayer, a message to everyone who had ever been told they weren't good enough. When the final note echoed through the hall, she lifted her hands slowly. For a moment, there was silence. Then the entire crowd stood and erupted in applause. The sound filled the space like a wave, long, loud, full of emotion. She stood, her heart trembling. Tears welled in her eyes. This time she didn't cry out of sadness or fear. She cried because she had finally done it. She had turned her pain into beauty. After the show, reporters came to interview her. One asked, "What were you thinking when you played?" She smiled softly and replied, "I was thinking about the people who laughed at me when I first started. I used to think their laughter would break me, but it actually shaped me. Without that, I wouldn't be standing here today." Her answer spread everywhere, online, in newspapers, even on TV. People admired her humility and strength. Messages poured in from strangers who said her story inspired them to chase their own dreams, no matter who doubted them. But she didn't chase fame after that. She didn't care about interviews or spotlights. Instead, she began teaching free piano lessons at a community center on weekends. She wanted to give other children the chance she never had, a chance to believe in themselves. The little room where she taught was small but filled with laughter. Some of the kids were shy, others noisy and playful, but all of them were curious. She would tell them, "Don't be scared of mistakes. Every wrong note teaches you something right." Watching them learn reminded her of her own beginnings. The shaky fingers, the uncertain sounds, the endless practice. It made her realize how much she had grown, not just as a musician, but as a person. Years passed and her name slowly became known in the music community. She composed several pieces that were played in local concerts and even used in short films. People admired her not only for her talent, but for her humility and kindness. Despite her success, she never forgot her roots. Every once in a while, she would visit her old school. The piano there was still the same, a little older, a little out of tune, but full of memories. She would sit down quietly, close her eyes, and play. The sound would echo down the empty hallways, and for a moment it felt like time had stood still. One day, a group of students walked in and stood near the door, listening. One of them whispered, "That's her, the one who used to go here. She's famous now." She looked up and smiled gently. "I'm not famous," she said softly. "I just never stopped playing." The students smiled back, inspired by her simplicity. They asked her to teach them a little, and she gladly did. For her, passing on her knowledge was the greatest joy. Later that day, as she walked outside, she paused for a moment and looked at the sky. The evening sun was fading into shades of orange and pink. She thought about her journey, how it began with mockery and ended with music that reached hearts, realized that life had given her something far greater than success, and it had given her purpose. She had learned that dreams don't come true overnight. They grow slowly, like a song being written one note at a time. And sometimes the most beautiful melodies are born out of pain. Her story became a quiet reminder to everyone around her. It doesn't matter where you start or who doubts you. What matters is that you keep believing, keep trying, and never give up on what makes your heart come alive. Because one day, the same people who once laughed might stand in awe, not just of your talent, but of your courage. And as she sat again at her piano that night, fingers gently pressing the keys, she smiled. The music filled the room softly, wrapping around her like a warm memory.